I mean, being a mentor to others, I think, has given me some of the best satisfaction that I've ever had in the workplace. And now it's funny being where I am now and seeing where I've been. It's like I am that guy that I wish I had.
Right,
You know,
right,
I feel like I kind of had a lack of mentors and I had to switch departments to learn
right.
more. And I had to be very aggressive and proactive about doing that. I had to make a plan. But I mean, I have people call me now that are 10 years younger that ask me about career advice and what they can do, and it's very flattering and it feels very rewarding. And I think
Absolutely.
one of my favorite quotes: "Be the person you wish you had,"
Had one
is
here.
how
Yeah,
it goes.
totally.
When you were younger, it goes a long way.
All right. Good morning and welcome to our new episode of Lead for Performance. I'm thrilled to welcome Daniel Shuman to the discussion today, who comes to us with a rich background in the full cycle of product development in a brand new industry to us, at least, and has a really rich experience in with ERGs, the Employee Resource Group. So we're looking to unpack that and really looking forward to your thoughts today, Daniel.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Sandra.
Yes, absolutely. So let's just jump in. Let's get us started, please, by just quickly walking us through your role and your, varied experience on the full pipeline of product development. A little bit about your industry, and then really what kind of drew you to focus on professional development and leadership development and recruitment.
Absolutely. So my name's Daniel Shuman. I have a biology bachelor's by background. I have an MBA in finance and strategy and leadership. The first from Penn State, the second from Rutgers in the U.S. I wanted to gain experience in each different part of the drug development pipeline in pharmaceuticals. So I actually started my first 5 years as a toxicology technician and a discovery R&D scientist, hands-on in the lab, working with immuno-oncology drugs, even with lab mice and lab rats, getting that early technical experience. From there, I wanted to branch out and learn more about how the business actually operated. I felt that while I was enjoying the lab job itself, I wasn't really learning how this business grew. I felt like I would be pigeonholed if I did not either get a PhD and double down into the sciences. I needed to get a different degree and then branch out into a different group where I could expand my network. So I felt I found a nice happy medium when I looked into clinical trials. So those global trial manager positions, procurement and outsourcing for trials is what drew me in. So it was a nice mix of a business background and a science background. So I moved in to be an outsourcing manager, handling contracts and budgets, working hand in hand with procurement, global alliance leads, and global trial managers for trials. And I worked on that for another 5 years. And then after that, wanted to learn the commercial side of things. So now we've made it, we've launched trials, and now how do we sell it? So I moved into commercial strategy and operations for cell therapy. So all the while I was there, I was also very involved for a number of years in our employee resource groups at the company I was at, which was Bristol Myers Squibb. Uh, During a few years there, I was in Climb, so it was our millennial, next gen, and bridging generational gaps focused ERGs while we were there. And the experience that I was able to get there, I think, was a real catalyst to allow me to do those departmental jumps. I don't think if the company hadn't had programs like that, it would have been very difficult to make those jumps because they were completely separate. It felt like jumping from a to a completely different company, going from discovery to clinical operations over to commercial strategy. So,
I know that that's
happy to talk
a
about that experience.
Yes, totally. I would love to, that's because I got to jump in and be like, tell us a little bit of why you found that so critical in your development. Having talked to a lot of ERG groups and been a part of them, let's say for decades myself, different versions of them, done a lot of talking in the last couple of years. It's interesting to hear, that you got such value from that experience. So just tell us a little bit, on the personal side, why is it, how they were able to be so helpful to your career jumps.
Well, on the personal side, so
Mhm.
if we dial it way back to when I was in my university, I actually was a biology major, but I was in a business fraternity. So I was a STEM major, wearing a suit, practicing mock interviews, and actually trying to upskill myself to really market myself to this new job network that I was going to be
Mhm.
applying for. And it's funny, once I got into interviews for discovery related jobs, I was probably the only one showing up with a suit to the interview. So finding a way to recreate how I can marry those two things of learning about the business but getting deeply involved in the science was important to me. And I was actually at the company for about 4 years before I even discovered that the ERGs was a thing. That's how much of a bubble it felt like in
Okay. Yeah.
discovery. Nobody in my group was even involved. It actually, somebody struck up a conversation with me at the lunch line one day and told me about Climb. So this newly created millennial and generational gap bridging ERG. I jumped at it right away and I started to get involved in our local chapter down there in Princeton, New Jersey. And while I was there, I realized like this is what I was looking for.
Mhm.
This is an outlet that the company helps fund that allows us to set up events around campus, bring in external speakers, and just do a number of different things. And the biggest takeaway was I was able to get experience that I wouldn't normally get in my role that
Mhm.
allowed me to prep my resume to make the next jump and then meet people across the company because when you join groups like this you're then going to naturally meet people from all over, and the number one way you're going to find your next role is through networking. That's kind of a given out there. So I got heavily involved, and within about 2 years of being in the group I moved on to the global team, and I became the global events lead of that ERG. And then over the course of a couple years, rose through the ranks to then become the global recruitment lead. So that's external recruitment, working with our talent acquisition partners at BMS to talk about what does next gen employees want out of the workforce.
Mhm.
And then after that role, scaled up again, and I became the global lead of growth development and recruitment. So essentially one of the vice presidents of the ERG. Now, the greatest thing I could say about the ERGs that we were in at BMS was the top positions were paid positions. So the person in charge, it was a paid full-time role for them to do it, and they would usually be expected to do it for about 2 to 3 years. I know most other pharma companies, it's not like that. It's a heavily involved but still volunteer position. The fact that they are paid, I think, adds a lot more weight to what you can accomplish. The budgets were quite high, I think, for the groups, and that allowed a lot of freedom to be able to do things. The leadership team could sometimes go to conferences. It gave us budgets to launch the projects we wanted, to buy any materials we needed to do, and the freedom to upskill each other. And we really scaled some incredible events during the time I was there.
Yeah. I was, as you were talking, thank you so much for sharing that. Those are, you almost again jumped up to my question, but I want to underline that, to me, when you speak of such a group that's so successful and makes an impact globally, one of the keys is probably the resources, right? We like to get real to the bottom line. That's probably the crux of the challenges that I have come across in speaking to leaders of different ERGs is, and I think I would call them twofold. So I would love to get your thoughts on the first one. You, I think, confirmed that, it takes a real commitment, which includes resources and budgets to do this kind of work on the side of your desk, you know, without, proper metrics in place and, proper dedication for the leadership time, as well as what it actually takes to launch the resourced groups is really difficult, right? Unless it's a commitment to the organization. The second one that I've come across is a lot of times the challenge comes from the fact that they're kind of like single events. So let's say one-time events, workshops, and it takes more than just like, I'm like, no matter how great each event is, what we hear a lot is it takes more than one-time events, right, to make an impact. So you're talking, so I think you're already talking about the fact, you're committing and yep, it takes more than just one, attending a one-off event to get the gains, right? So I just wonder if you can comment, do you agree with those challenges? And,
Yeah.
what have you seen when people dabble in it, in those kind of taking part in them?
Absolutely. I think many times it's one-off events, and for
Mhm.
some that helps. For some, it's the inspiration they need to take action and get more involved. But for many others, it might not be, right?
Mhm.
I mean, but it doesn't mean it's not important. One of the biggest takeaways that I learned while I was in that role was that when it comes to leadership development talks and streams and networking events like that, some people might sit back and say like, oh, they're saying everything I already know. They're just kind of pointing out the obvious. You're sitting in the back, you might be rolling your eyes. I
Yeah.
learned while being in that position That's not the same for many people. Everybody's different. I remember watching some people diligently take notes, and it could just be tips as easy as, try to meet one new person every week and get coffee. It could be, sit up straight. Make sure you sit at the table. Like when you're at a group meeting, don't sit in the back. Like be more present. It could be some of the simplest things. And I would see people jot down notes, and say like, "Oh, I got to remember to do this. Got to remember to do that." These events are very important for a lot of people. Not everything comes so obvious to
Hmm.
people, but
Hmm.
more importantly, not everyone's going to necessarily act. They might hear it, but without repetition, they might not act upon it. So I think that having a series of events is a really good thing. But even one-off events are good. Most importantly, though, I think that developing a strategy that matches the business needs is the best way to approach it. And I'll give you an example of that. So during the pandemic, everybody went fully remote in our company, like many others, and then we had to reintegrate after almost 2 years away. Well, when we came back after being remote in these ERGs, the focus quickly became what is the biggest business need now that our team, our volunteer teams can help with, right? And I felt at the time in the lead position that it was retaining employees. We were losing essentially all of our contractors that were being asked to come back to the workplace because either they wanted to be fully remote or they wanted a full-time job or they were just going to find a job that was fully
Hmm.
remote, right?
Hmm.
And then the full-time employees themselves were thinking about jumping ship for a more flexible workspace. So how do we help those people? So we actually started to help them by putting more events together for resume writing and career building, which might
Hmm.
sound counterintuitive. Why would you help people rewrite their resumes if you want to retain
Yeah,
them, right? But it was all an effort to say, if you are looking for something different and you're looking for a change, find it in another department here, and we will help. We'll help the transition. We'll help facilitate that growth. So I knew firsthand that I could get a completely different experience just by changing business units. We wanted to
mm,
help people do that. So we actually hired external speakers to come in using our ERG budget and do resume writing workshops
mm,
and being able to pitch your personal brand. How can you use your existing network internally when you have a company of tens of thousands of people to get a different experience
yeah, that's
entirely,
good.
but not lose your tenure, your stock, whatever you have in your current company? So that
Yeah.
was year one. And then we built upon that the following year to say, okay, now that you've gone through our workshops for resume writing, let's see if we can put together an internal career fair.
Hmm.
So what the idea for that at the time was, let's get together all of the hiring managers in the local area, and this was in New Jersey, see if we can get many of them to show up in one place where you could physically hand them your newly rewritten resume
Mm,
and help, again, facilitate internal movement because it's better to retain people than to lose them. And even selfishly, if you're part of the company, it's going to be a lot more expensive to hire new external talent post
for
pandemic
sure.
that are going to demand much higher salaries and
For
probably,
sure.
more work from home time than to retain employees and allow them to freely move around. Okay. So I think it's some of those things to consider when you have these ERGs. It's a win-win. How can those networks be used to solve the current business needs that you might not like want to build an extra team for, you know,
Yeah.
put extra funding towards. You already have that volunteer network and they get experience too. I was able to lead, two layers of direct reports on this global ERG team and then put that on my resume. So then when
Right.
I needed to
Right. Become
apply for higher level positions, I had people management experience as well.
Yeah, that's actually, those are great examples. Thank you for sharing those. I love that. So instead of hiding from the problems, you're like leaning into it because, and then you get exactly win-win situation is where I imagine the individuals are getting support, but the organization is winning also by providing the best path for people to stay internally and get to their spot that makes them happy for long-term success, right? Ultimately, it's a different way of looking at the problem. You shared about that even one-off can actually give people exposure to different topics and perspectives. As simple as they can seem, it can actually land differently for that individual and trigger, a new path for them. Uh, Key to put them into action. So it can't just be hearing about, tips and tricks and they stay on the paper or in that event. So it's always key to put into action where some of the multi-session support can help. But then I love the third one, underline the the strategy alignment with the business outcomes for the ERG groups. I would just follow up on that great example. When you are measuring the investment made with the ERGs, and obviously you shared that you had a nice budget. To the flip side, do you share outcomes that driven by the organization?
Absolutely. Yeah, capturing the
Yeah,
metrics is extremely important, especially to justify your
perfect.
budget year to year. You need to show that the money is being used in a proper way. And that's not to say like we didn't have plenty of freedom. We did. It's just we should have executed each quarter, a certain number of events, and we can point towards great business outcomes. So another good example, the largest ERG event that we had at the time, we were a company of almost 40,000 people at the peak, was something called Climb Elevate. It was essentially an internal LinkedIn learning we created that had started 6, 7 years ago at this point. And we said, in a global pharmaceutical company, you're going to have many different facets of expertise here. What if we allowed people to host any course they wanted for the standard was up to 1 hour, and anybody could sign up for it? We'll create the SharePoint, we'll create all of the sign up links, we'll help you do all the recording so people can post it for later, but we're going to have it in a specific time frame. We would do it 6 weeks over the summer. It kind of built up hype, and there was a nice element to be something being condensed and not constant throughout the year. And people of all facets could teach courses on if you had advanced Excel skills, if you knew how to do flow cytometry and people are interested, if you had personal finance skills. You could even do things that were more hobby related. We had courses on bird watching and other things. I want to say 80% of the courses were directly business related, but if you wanted a crash course in what does somebody do in this job or that job around the world, people would create a presentation and talk about it and then answer some Q&A on it. And some of it was extremely helpful. People had great suggestions on good presentations you could make, slide decks and so forth. And we had at its peak over 13,000 people sign up in a company of only 40,000 people globally. And that was over 9,800, I believe, individuals. So you had almost 20%, or 20, closer to 25% of a global workforce signing in to take free, non-required courses that were just taught by other employees. So talk about a huge global knowledge share,
Yeah.
in 6 weeks each summer, and people would get excited for it. We would put it up on the TVs. If you want to teach a course for Climb Elevate this summer, sign up a few weeks in advance. We'll get you all set up. It was honestly fairly simple to pull off. The volume is pretty big, but the outcomes were incredible.
Yeah.
The great feedback, and it's almost how do you even measure it? It didn't cost us any actual dollars. It just cost some time per person to do it. And now the whole workforce is sharing knowledge.
Well, having learned over the last few years, again, more about the typical engagement numbers, I can attest to the incredible engagement that you just speak of there. To engage such a huge percentage of a global workforce is really exceptional, right? So, and I know that's one way. And in this case, of course, you're talking about the investment is really low, the engagement was really high, and people were getting a lot out of it. That's easy to defend in the boardroom. But let me go back to the earlier example as well. I wonder if you can build on and share with the audience any specific metrics that you use to link these types of investments to business outcomes that go beyond attendance, satisfaction, etc. Just because I know that that's always that comes up all the time as a real challenge for leaders in this space.
Yeah, the number one thing that comes to mind is retainment. I think we
Yeah.
had learned from talent acquisition that the average person at the company would stay roughly 3 years,
Huh?
whereas the average person who was also involved in an ERG would stay over 4.5 to 5 years.
Wow.
We also knew that the likelihood that somebody would be promoted was almost 3 times greater when they were involved in an ERG.
Okay.
So we had those two metrics
So
that
those
you
are
can
great
equate to
metrics,
saving
especially
money.
with the earlier one when you said that that was linked to the actual problem of retention. And now you're showing that people with engagement in the ERGs are staying longer and going up in their career, more likely to go up in their career. So
Yes.
those metrics would take some time to measure, right? Like, and and again, you had the benefit of the big pool of people, like a global scope of your company. So do you give that is there a typical data set that you look for? And I know you're a scientist, so you'll appreciate that side of things too, just to help guide how to start some of these data metric captioning for leaders who might be just getting going?
Well, each of these ERGs had their own insights and analytics pillar within them.
Okay.
So, to kind of put more specifics to it, our group had 5,000 people signed up as volunteers. Each chapter in each global site around the world essentially had a chapter with, a local group of people that were involved. It could have been a dozen people, could have been a couple dozen people, and our leadership team had roughly 60 to 70 people. And then we had 5 or 6 pillars for each ERG. So it's like engagement, insights and analytics, external partnerships, and so forth. So every project that we ran, we wanted to capture as much as possible. So it was engagement. We would have exit surveys as well. So anybody that we had their email that would have been involved, we would send an exit survey and we would have them rate satisfaction 1 to 10, communication 1 to 10, all of these things. And then at the end of the year, we would have to compile everything we accomplished, and our lead would have to present it to essentially his boss, which was always a C-suite member of the company. So you
Hmm.
had a C-suite member that was essentially the sponsor of the organization, and the leads would meet with them, I believe, weekly. So you would have to essentially defend these things, but I think that they were pretty easily defendable. And I could give you another good example. Obviously, some of this could be intangible, right? But when you say 13,000 people upskilled themselves by a knowledge share, it almost speaks for itself. One of my favorite examples was a project that I actually created at the company. So I had just become the head of recruitment globally in February of 2020, the month before we went on. Everyone went fully remote. So recruiting, meaning external recruitment, recruiting from universities, I would have a standing meeting once a month with talent acquisition to kind of talk about what a next gen people might want out of the
Hmm.
workforce. And we imagine having a team of direct reports focused on recruitment, and then all of a sudden, every recruiting event for the entire year gets canceled overnight. So what do you do with these
Right.
people, right? Now we start talking about, okay, I have a team. What's the greatest business need that we could accomplish right now? And we brainstormed, what is everyone hearing on their calls? And one of the things that kept coming up was, well, a lot of the people that I work with that are parents with young kids, they're actually struggling doing both. Their kids are running in and out of the calls and the meeting. They're having to both double helping like homeschool and work at the same time. Maybe we could do something there. So we decided to put together a tutoring program that we called Climb Tutors. We asked in the same way that we asked for volunteers for our Elevate Knowledge Share. We knew that some people were dramatically overworked during the pandemic, and many of the hands-on scientists were honestly kind of underworked. They were told, go in, do everything you need to do hands-on, and then go home. So
Hmm.
they had some time on their hands. So we said, if you are willing to tutor a child of a person that works at this company, feel
Hmm.
free to sign up with whatever
Very cool.
course you'd like to do. Maybe it's math, maybe Spanish, maybe it's German,
Yeah.
maybe it's a number of subjects, and you would do small group tutoring sessions. So we actually created the platform in the same way, and people could sign up with time slots. The teachers got priority to choose when they're available, what subject they wanted. And over the course of, we did what we called 2 semesters, the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021. We helped actually several hundred children of full-time employees at BMS with their homework, with their vocabulary assignments, with
Oh
with
my
their
gosh.
reading and writing. And I'll tell you, I've never gotten nicer emails than at the end of that project, or people
Kick
didn't
the
want us
bug.
to end it. They wanted us to just keep going indefinitely. I'm like, I'm sorry, we're a volunteer organization, and as we re-enter the workforce in person, we're not going to be able to keep this up. But I'm flattered. I remember one time we got an email from an employee in Great Britain that we were able to get their child, who's in middle school, a German tutor that was in a German site for BMS. They were able to make that link and help them for a few weeks.
I
So
mean, that's incredible. What an incredible
yeah,
story. I mean, that's another super great example of, again, being tapped into what the workforce needs in this time and this phase specifically. And again, connecting it to what the organization also, is going on at the organizational level. Having been a parent of small kids during COVID, I can only imagine, I can completely relate to how grateful the parents must have been for this experience, and the others who got to help, right? Like in such a meaningful way. That is an incredible example. Thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah, thank you. So there's always an
Yeah,
opportunity, right? Even in a
yeah.
crisis, you can repurpose a team. And I think, we were able to gather how many impressions did we have on that? How many people did we help? And what we ultimately equated that to was work hours saved. When we would say,
Yeah.
these are
Okay.
how many hours we had our volunteer workforce help when they had the free time to free up an X number of hours for everybody else who wasn't
Okay.
distracted
Awesome.
while their kids were home.
Yes. Okay. And thank you for highlighting the metric. So, and I think that's again, really, again, I think some of those satisfaction attendance metrics are super valuable, right? And they're an indicator and certainly useful. But really coming back again to what the organization is looking needs, what business outcomes it needs, and then connecting the work to the gains at that level is likely critical for those conversations to go easy and well at that
Mhm.
sponsorship C-suite level. Well, a couple of times you mentioned working and to discover on what the next gen wants out of the next generation of workers, right? Wants out of the workforce. I would love it if you could share with us some of your key findings or your favorite findings that you'd like to highlight.
Sure. It's a great question. We looked consistently at generational data, at what a baby boomer, what a Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zers would want. And we had come to find that even though it might seem like many Gen Zers want to maybe work remotely, an Instagram generation that wants to constantly be out and travel, the way the numbers looked is many of them actually did want to be in person to make an impression, which is good.
Mhm.
Probably more wanted to be remote than the previous generation, but technology has also changed. So we can't be ignorant for that. And people didn't have that expectation maybe 15 years ago that they could work remotely, right?
Mhm.
So the impression was they want to be able to come in, they want to be able to create a community, they want to be able to work in a company that has purpose. That's extremely important. I believe that we had seen many times that being with a company that stands for the right things and has purpose and is vocal and transparent about that was number one, more so than pay. Pay being, number two was compensation. And that coincides similarly with some of the things I had learned in my MBA courses about, motivations of people. But below a certain threshold, money is actually extremely important.
Yes.
Above a certain threshold, it becomes what projects am I working on? Am I growing towards what I want to do? It's kind of like once your basic needs are met plus a little surplus,
Yeah.
there's diminishing returns on what
Yeah.
pay will do. It's so much more important for a manager to focus on what you want to accomplish day to day in the workplace to create satisfaction. So, one of the things that we had noticed a transition over time was millennials had went from wanting to be more in office to wanting to be more remote over the course of about a 10-year span. And I
Mhm.
remember being in a meeting once and people were wondering this, oh, why is this shift? What's happening? And then somebody raised their hand and had the obvious answer. It's like this generation is now starting families and having children. So
Right.
now they're going to want naturally more work-life
Mhm.
balance. They might already be now in middle management positions. They're not trying to hustle so hard. Now it's about how do I manage both a family and a career at the same time. So you see the shift in the statistics of that generation that that correlates very well with just like what those people are doing at that point in their life. So you can it's very important to read the statistics in relation to like what are the people of this age group naturally doing. Do you think that there are hiring managers out there that probably have hired Gen Zers that are very, go go go. They want to move up quickly. They want to have a ample free time to travel and do things. And I've seen that myself. It's
Mhm.
just important to reiterate back to people like the number one way you're going to get the things you want moving up is meeting people. And if you're constantly fully remote, as useful as that
Mhm.
can be, you're never going to have organic interactions. You're never going to run into somebody in the workplace and make a new face-to-face connection. Everything has to be intentional. You're going to have to do three times the work to set up meetings, to you know, message people on LinkedIn or message people internally on your Teams or your Slack account to go from person to person, and people are going to have to vouch for you. It's not the same as being in person. So I recommend to every young person be as visible and present as possible. Go in more often than you need to, and then like you'll earn that time off and eventually. And work-life balance is better now than it had been in the past. But don't leave being present just because you can have a little bit more freedom being remote, I would say too.
Yeah, there's a trade-off, right? That's you're just
Absolutely.
highlighting a really good trade-off. And then yeah, that strategic networking is always key, right? For success in your current role and the next role in discovery and the connections that you're making. That looking at data through the context of the story is so critical always. It's so interesting how you follow that trend of from in office to to flexibility due to the kind of hitting the mid-career, which with other priorities outside of the office that drive that distinction. We like to talk here a lot about kind of developing the habits of sustainable performance. And I would just wonder what you think from your experience, what role that has to play in career success ultimately for people when we're thinking about long term success.
Regarding sustainable performance, it comes down to creating a good, healthy routine where your team can be focused. I definitely think it starts at the top. So the manager has to set a tone of transparency and trying their very best to make an equitable workload among the team. Nobody wants to be the high performer that just gets rewarded with more and more work because it's like, oh, you do such a good job. Here you go. You're going to get the next hardest thing that we can put on your plate. Unfortunately, that's sometimes the case. I think the best times that I've had managers, they've had uh, weekly meetings where we just catch up for 30 minutes. I remember them being Wednesday mornings where we just talk. How is everyone doing this week? Does anyone have any concerns? You be visible, you be present, you be very approachable. I think that goes such a long way. I can specifically remember examples, and not everyone's going to relate to this comment, but like where I have felt burnout from 60-hour weeks back to back to back, and my boss, as nice as they were, had no control over the workload that we were coming in, and that was obvious. They probably could have done a little more to make a more equitable distribution of work, but sometimes you're just in a job where it's coming down. There's a hiring freeze, no
Hmm.
help is coming, and you
Yeah.
have to manage it the best you can. What
Hmm.
that takes is transparency from your boss saying, are doing everything we can. This is how we're going to try to make sure that we're going to get through this together, right? I am overworked too. You could put yourself over there. It's kind of disarming if your boss is like, listen, guys, I'm stressed too. This is what's coming down. You don't have to throw the higher management under the bus, but you be as open as you are allowed to be with your team, and that'll go such a long way. If you get skittish as a boss and you don't know what to do and you keep your team in the dark, they're going to start leaving when they become burned out, or they're
Hmm.
going to take way more sick time off, which is valid, but like you're going to lose people
Hmm.
at the end of the day. I also know that like being in my experience, experiencing some burnout and some overwork is not actually as bad as experiencing a boss that's not present at all. I've seen both, and being with a boss that's either not present or reacts to stress in a way that stresses out the rest of the team. If the boss is starting to look like they're going to have a panic attack in the workplace, everyone's going to feel that. Nobody's going to want to come in and see that person, right? You kind of have to be the rock of the team. And I think it starts from there. And then you can get through a lot together if you create camaraderie among a team. And then keep voicing your concern. I mean, there's power in numbers, right? So if an entire team is saying to upper management, we are overworked, come as a group, come with a singular voice, don't be combative, be solution oriented, right? This is how I think we might be able to better distribute work. Maybe we could bring on a contractor if needed. I think that there's solutions there, but it's important to recognize you're not the only one that's feeling overworked most likely, and it's extremely important to come together as a collective and voice in a calm and solution oriented sense in that space.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, hearing your thoughts on this, which, I can totally agree with what you're talking about, but I have to recognize that it puts a lot of onus on the managers, right? Actually, there's a critical role to set the tone, the pace, help people with the right prioritization, expectations, setting up that, communication layer with their teams. But I also know often the managers themselves are trying to figure it out for themselves. They might have got to that spot based on their individual contributor skills, but now they're in this almost hot seat of in the middle, kind of like the top management expectations, and then everybody kind of coming to them for
Right.
resolutions and solutions. Have you seen any development approaches or events that really help with those skills, and particularly at that mid manager layer?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's being middle management might actually be the hardest position to be in
Yes.
because you have to
Agreed.
act as a shield for your team,
Yeah.
also advocate for the high performers there, train them, offer that extra time, and do your own job. Your higher managers, your higher directors and vice presidents are going to expect a lot from you, and they're going to, if your team fails, it's your failure. If your team
Yeah,
wins, it's your win.
exactly.
So it's a tough spot to be in. I think that sometimes you might get people that are great individual contributors but really don't want to be managers, but that are then people managers, but then are that put in that position. And that's a sad thing. Don't put somebody in a role that doesn't want to be over people. Honestly, don't do that. Look for somebody that's good at their job that wants to be in that position. I think it's important to have, again, things like these ERGs. I think it's important to have more formal leadership development training.
Yes.
Again, it's not silly. A lot of people take a lot away from it, more than you might think. And it's important to be able to give people outlets. I know that where we were at BMS, we also had HBA, so the Healthcare Business Women's Association is a very
Mm,
big, a wide network of many pharma companies that bring in many people, obviously predominantly women, together to network. We had many of their events on site in our atriums at BMS, and it happens all the way at other companies, J&J and many others in the pharma industry. So that gives people an external network that they can build too, to talk about, share ideas
mm.
on career development and so forth. And then for the individual, I mean, if you ever needed to leave, you've already built that external network, which is extremely valuable. But in order to be an effective boss, I think you do have to have training. Not everyone's going to be a natural at it. Not everyone's going to know that have to put in extra effort to meet with their team. And if you want to be supportive of your team, you're going to ask them to develop their own plan. Where would you like to go as an individual? Take the time. And if somebody says, "Hey, I want after this job, I want that job." Don't take offense to that. Everyone leaves at some point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's make sure that you can help cultivate the skills that are needed to get them where they want to go. So one of the tactics that you can do, it seems really simple, but bring up the exact job description of the job they want next and say, here are some of the areas you'll need to work on if you want to get that job. Here's some overlap with what we do here. Okay, I can get you involved in a project that does this. I can get you more experience, that. So you upskill them in what they're currently doing as preparation for where they want to go at the same time. Show them the exact job description.
Thank you so much. You've shared such really good specific examples of what's worked. Again, in the space where you had the support and resourcing to do so. So that's really helpful to highlight. Say on the flip side of that, I would love to ask you if you have anything you can highlight about things that did not work or, mistakes you see others make that we can help prevent.
I think that, yeah, there's a lot that doesn't work. I think a lack of transparency from upper management when times are tough. It's easy to be a good boss when times are easy. When times are tough, it's much harder. Transparency is key. Being approachable as a manager is very important. Okay, so again, more responsibility on good people skills and soft skills with the manager. I think it's understanding the dynamics of your team to a degree. Put people in areas that they're going to succeed. So it's like don't force a square peg into a round hole type of thing. So other exercises such as DISC method, Myers-Briggs, Clifton Strengths to understand the personality dynamics of your team, even just to show you where there might be some imbalance could be useful information, right? And say, oh, maybe somebody might actually be more happy here, more happy here. We have a few too many dominating personalities. Maybe they would be happier if we, you know, put them on separate teams where they could thrive and lead individually, right? I think it's taking the effort to do things like that. I think it's creating the outlets for people. I mean, these ERGs, these extra programs was by far, my favorite thing about working in the workplace that I was in. And honestly, it definitely retained me longer than I think it would have otherwise. And it provided opportunities to move around internally. I had bosses that were completely against it, thought that it just took away from my day job. I had bosses that were intrigued by it and were interested. Most were honestly neutral in my experience, that were like, okay, as long as you get your day job done, you can do these other things. And that was good enough for me. But I would say get involved in your employees' direct reports careers, ask them what they're interested in, offer up these suggestions of how they could get more involved, right? I mean, the more involved they are, honestly, it's kind of a feedback loop. I worked all those hours on my day job, but I was also doing softball at work. I was also in these ERGs. The more I was there, the more and felt supported, the more I wanted to be there and to
Yeah.
get involved.
It's tapping into that purpose probably just like what you brought up as being such a critical component of a successful
Yeah.
career actually,
And then I
right?
became more
Yeah,
supportive. I wanted to train
right.
others. I wanted to say, hey, And now that you're here, don't just treat this as do my job and go home. There's so much more you can get out of this. Milk it for all it's worth. Here's all the benefits we have. And I kind of became a proponent of this is a great place to be. You just have to know where to look. You got to know the right opportunities to take up here.
So I know this was a part of just a part of your job, right? But are you being so passionate about it and armed with all these practical learnings? Are you looking to make this a bigger focus in your next career step?
Kind of on a break from some of
Just
this at the moment, but
yeah, fair.
I would love to. I mean, being a mentor to others, I think, has given me some of the best satisfaction that I've ever had in the workplace. And now it's funny being where I am now and seeing where I've been. It's like I am that guy that I wish I had.
Right, right,
I feel like I kind of had a lack of mentors and I had to switch departments to learn
right.
more. And I had to be very aggressive and proactive about doing that. I had to make a plan. But I mean, I have people call me now that are 10 years younger that ask me about career advice and what they can do, and it's very flattering and it feels very rewarding. And I think
Absolutely.
one of my favorite quotes: "Be the person you wish you had,"
Had one.
is how
Yeah,
it goes.
totally.
When you were younger, it goes a long way to creating both a successful team and people that want to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thank you so much for sharing all of your successes and learnings in this area. I think it was such a practical share with the examples. And, I find them really inspirational. And again, how to create buy-in for them and show the success of them, which is really critical to be able to do more. So thank you so much for all your insights. And thank you for being here and sharing that with our audience.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandra. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. It's a great talk.